How often should you review your objectives?
Typically, I'll do it as part of the management review cycle. That's where we will do our management reviews of our objectives. So depending on how often you do that, I guess, monthly, quarterly, that sort of thing would be typical. If your workers have been more intimately involved in that, you could do it at a larger group meeting where toolbox talks, those sorts of things. Not every time, certainly not weekly or anything like that. I think minimum monthly so that you can actually see some change. If you look at them too often, it looks like we're doing the same thing all the time and we're not seeing movement towards those objectives. But on the flip side, if you leave it a little bit too long, things can drift and you do nothing for 6 months and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, we had that objective, but we forgot all about it. So I think somewhere in that sort of month to quarterly is probably a fair time for something to happen, but for it not to get too out of control.
So I don't think there's any set target. I think it comes down to at what level you are reviewing them, whether it's at the strategic high level or whether it's at the more operational lower level. I think what the important thing is that the organisation must identify what target they set themselves for reviewing these and align to that. One of the things I don't think organisations should do is simply set objectives because an ISO auditor says that they have to set objectives, and then a couple of weeks before the ISO auditor comes in, they review what objectives they set last year and set new objectives. I think that's completely wrong. It has no purpose whatsoever for the organisation. I would say around, a monthly review would give a good indication of where an organisation is on that journey aligned to their objectives.
I think it depends on the time frame of the objective. So hypothetically, if we've got annual objectives in our organisation, we would obviously perform performance monitoring, measurement and analysis on a monthly basis, and then report. We have a monthly feedback meeting in which our annual objectives, because remember, when you set objectives, you have to monitor, measure, and you have to be able to report on the status of the objectives. So again, the answer to the question is it depends on the time frame. Our annual objectives we review and report on once a month, but let's say you had a short-term objective that was a month or a week, we might shorten that review period to either daily feedback or weekly feedback. So I think the key driver for us is what is the lifespan of the objective, and then the review frequency would be driven around that lifespan.
Yeah, and of course the most important thing if you are sort of reviewing is that you communicate your findings to the people that have been involved in it. So often companies will do that review of objectives but never report the findings out to the people who were part of that process.
We recommend regular review of your objectives and the supporting actions at least 4 times per year. It is an opportunity to reflect on progress, any barriers and challenges in achieving those objectives. It also, review allows you to look at the progress and give some feedback to the teams involved, which can be quite important.
Well, that depends on the nature of the objective itself. Some objectives and the plans to achieve those objectives need to be reviewed each month, for example, and others only annually. It all depends on the level of risk and the importance of an individual objective. And I guess this is where sometimes it goes wrong, because I think you see quite often that the objectives are reviewed on an annual basis, and really that's not an effective way of reviewing them, because if you're only having a look at once a year, they're not living and breathing and providing value to the business. So my advice is an organisation should schedule the review requirements that are appropriate to each individual objective. An approach of just, as I said earlier, an approach of just reviewing objectives and plans once a year is very rarely effective.
To me, this question is a little bit how long is a piece of string? It very much depends on the objective that we're looking at. So if the objective includes daily or weekly targets, then obviously we should be looking at it daily and weekly to ensure that we're meeting those particular objectives and at least monitoring at those timeframes. If it is a more general objective, for example, reducing the number of defects or something along those lines, where we don't actually have a specific time frame set, we could create ourselves an ongoing metric, and that metric could then be checked at particular times. So it might be at daily team meetings, could be at weekly team meetings, something like that. Now, one thing I will say though is that your objectives should be reviewed at your management level meetings. So however you particularly run those and however often you run those, the objectives should be checked to ensure that they are being measured and they're being successfully measured. And then also at the same time checking what the current status is. So seeing if those objectives are on track and seeing if there's anything you might need to do to bring them back on track if they're not.
To all the partners who contributed today, thank you, and hopefully the audience is going to learn some new techniques, your observations, and maybe they can get some value from it and maybe change the way they're doing it. So thank you.